All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Today's topic is secure multi-tenant databases and hosts. This is with Enterprise Manager, the security compliance framework. With me today is Amal Chiplunker, Harish Nitagata, and myself, Tim Mooney. This is a webinar, a part of the Enterprise Manager Deep Dive series. If you like what you see today, we have more on the calendar, so stay tuned there. Couple of logistics. We have a Q&A panel down at the bottom. So we have our team here will answer your questions there. So ask your questions throughout the entire session. We will have some slides. We also have a live demo or a demo to share with you. So with that, let's go to the next slide. So here's our agenda. We're going to talk about Enterprise Manager. We're going to give you a little dial in on the general area, and then we'll go into security. Then we'll get right into the specifics about securing databases and hosts using Enterprise Manager. Then, like I said, we'll do a demo again at the end. Throughout the session, we have Q&A, but at the end, we will have some dedicated time to get any questions that we weren't able to get to throughout the session. All right, Harish, I'd like to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Tim. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, and let's get started. To begin with, let me set the stage. Everything I'm going to talk about is part of a database lifecycle management pack. This pack contents can be categorized into 3 pillars: provision and clone, patch and upgrade, configuration and compliance management. With pillar 1, you can completely automate deployment of standardized configurations at scale. You can provision all types of databases, whether it's single instance, RAC, multi-tenant, and even TDE-enabled databases. You can deploy databases on various environments, commodity hardware, Exadata, XSCC. With pillar 2, you want to patch your databases in a timely manner, especially for all security patches at scale. Fleet maintenance gives you that ability to automate patching and upgrade of both grid and databases of all types with minimal downtime at scale in an heterogeneous environment. Finally, the third pillar, configuration and compliance management, can be leveraged to build out standardized configurations, monitor any misconfigurations, and deviations from security policies. You can leverage out-of-the-box patch recommendations standard to determine missing security patches on all databases targets residing in a host. You can use out-of-the-box security compliance standards like CIS, STAIC, PCI-DSS, or even HIPAA to secure your assets. With these features, this pack enables in lowering the cost of database management by automating time-consuming and error-prone manual or scripts-based deployment of databases. In addition to lowering the cost, this pack enables in reducing the risks. What does that really mean, right? I mean, you want to know what does risk reduction means. So today, in many data centers, as business grows, the number of database instances deployed grows rapidly. If you think about it, over a period of time, individual admins or developers often make some choices on the versions of the databases and also some patch levels of the databases, eventually leading up to numerous variants of the same asset within the same data center. You as a DBA, this leads to administrative challenges and also compliance challenges. So DBLM pack provides mechanism to manage the configuration sprawl in your data center. This will enable you to standardize various configurations, comply with your security policies to reduce the overall risk of security exposure. Now let's look at how this capability can address standardization and security enforcement for various types of targets with the intent of increasing the security posture. To begin with, let's look at few of the security challenges that you deal with it regularly. It's implied that securing your database and infrastructure assets are critical to avoid any kinds of data breaches. Talking about data breaches, there have been quite a few breaches in the past couple of years, especially this year alone. There have been quite a few high-scale breaches and numerous ransomware type of attacks, whether it included shutting down the distribution channels, supply chain, or getting access to millions of personal details of customers. Many of these data breaches were either due to misconfiguration or a bad actor getting access to a user with elevated privileges. Today, if you look at various data breach reports, you will see nearly 45% to 50% of the breaches are due to misconfiguration. And this has become the preferred ways for bad actors to exploit and get hold of sensitive information. And typically, misconfigurations can occur when an employee stands up, an employee with significant access to a large number of data stands up a database without the usual security controls that aligns with your own security policies. So in a data center with thousands of databases, the risk of numerous databases deviating from the reference configuration or deviating from the security policies, as it grows higher, the risk of security exposure grows higher. So an uncontrolled configuration sprawl is a vehicle for potential misconfiguration and security risk. While this uncontrolled sprawl is a huge security risk, timely patching or lack thereof is another security risk. One of the primary reasons for you to patch your targets is to keep those secure. As and when Oracle publishes CPUs every quarter, you want to make sure these are applied on all required targets. Now, how do you know what patches are missing in each of the targets? It would be ideal if there's a mechanism in the product that can indicate to you the precise patch numbers missing on each of the target. So any database targets without recommended security patches applied is another vehicle for a database or data breach. Finally, once you have applied all the security patches, you have configured per reference target, how do you ensure each of these targets are compliant with security policies defined by your security team? You want to monitor for compliance policies, which essentially aligns with ensures the security of the targets and aligns with your policies. Any violation in compliance will be an indication of potential security exposure. So let's take a look at each of these challenges and learn how Enterprise Manager can help you solve. Let's begin with ways to standardize on configuration. So there is, talking about configuration sprawl, in Enterprise Manager, there is a one-stop place for all configuration management, setup, and operations. After you have identified a well-known number of configurations, you can monitor all relevant targets to be compliant with each of these reference targets. From setup perspective, you can define a drift that allows you to define and save your desired configuration known as reference target. And then you can create a comparison using the template available out of the box or customized, where you can choose to disregard unnecessary configuration properties based on your configuration security policies. Once the setup is complete, drift monitoring gets initiated that tracks differences against reference target. The goal is for every other target to be consistent with the reference target. So any change in any target, as far as configuration is concerned, will automatically show as a drift, and it notifies whenever there is a drift detected. You as a DBA, you can assess the security risk by analyzing the configuration drift. So let's look at some real use cases where configuration drift plays a role. So a few examples here are: a customer has a requirement to compare 50 database initialization parameters every day. It's only 50 database initialization parameters out of hundreds of init parameters that are there. Goal is to detect any configuration deviations, make sure there is notification, and then remediate each of those deviations to be compliant with the baseline. Another example that I can talk about is rack database instances. So the goal is to, if your goal is to ensure that within a cluster database, within a cluster, all databases are consistent as far as configuration parameters are concerned, the drift is the ideal way to monitor the configurations across all the entities in a cluster. Yet another example that I can talk about is you could set up data guard between primary and secondary engineered system and monitor for configuration consistency of all the system targets. This is to ensure applications that are running on primary will continue to run seamlessly on the secondary when there is a switchover or failover whenever that happens. Now, what are the key benefits of configuration drift monitoring? Few things, right? It increases standardization by limiting the number of configurations. It improves the security posture by reducing vulnerabilities. And from a DBA's point of view and from an administration point of view, it reduces the overall maintenance cost because you're dealing with a limited number of known configurations across the data center. But change does happen, right? I mean, there will be requirements where changes need to be done for a specific database to cater to a particular application. Now, how do you know what changes were done on each target, when it was done, who did it, and why was it done? If you can have answers for these, it will help you trace back the rationale for those changes in case there are any security exposures. And this can be accomplished with the configuration history capability in EM. With this history, you can track changes to targets over time by specifying and refining the search criteria. You can view change history. You can annotate change records with comments that become part of the change history. And these annotations will have a timestamp and an owner who did that. And you can save this change history details to a file. So by leveraging configuration drift management, you will be able to standardize on configurations deployed, monitor drifts, and reduce vulnerabilities, and also reduce the sprawl. Now let's look at how you can obtain security patch recommendations for your databases, identify missing security patches for the database targets. To reduce security vulnerabilities, it is highly recommended to apply all security patches for each of the database targets in a timely manner. In an environment with thousands of database targets, how do you go about identifying targets that are missing their security patches? Enterprise Manager ships a standard called security recommendations out of the box. With MOS connectivity in place and relevant targets associated to this security recommendation standard, you will be able to see list of all missing patches for a given target. These missing patches are essentially those that Oracle has published, but your target is not patched with those patches. So you can generate a compliance report that will call out precise patch numbers missing in a specific target and you could use that for your patch planning using fleet maintenance. And you can plan your timeline for patching all those targets. So that's a simple patch recommendations out of the box solution that is available for you to determine what security patches are published by Oracle, and then you plan your maintenance windows and go patch those targets. So that way you're ensuring the security of all your database targets. Now that you have standardized on well-known number of configurations and patched your databases in a timely manner, let's look at how to secure database and host configurations, achieve compliance with industry and regulatory standards. Now, why is this important? It helps you to secure databases and infrastructure, reduces vulnerabilities. You can generate audit security report to ensure compliance with your IT security policies. And you can have that audit report available for auditors to review the compliance. And you can reduce the DBA time by automating remediation of any configuration violations. Securing an Oracle database is much like securing any other system. You are protecting your data. That could be intellectual property, financial data, or personal data about your customers or your own staff. You need to safeguard that data with security controls that restrict access according to your policy by using either industry standard benchmarks or custom policies. There are broad set of standards supported by Enterprise Manager. There are standards for databases, standards for Linux OS, and then there are standards for Exadata engineered systems. By securing configuration of Oracle databases, underlying Linux hosts, and Exadata engineered systems, you can get a unified view of the overall compliance of all these targets, starting from database and south of it all the way to the infrastructure. You can automate remediation of any violations, reduce DBA's time-consuming manual remediation effort, and the compliance evaluation report can be used, as I said earlier, to audit the compliance of each target. Now let's elaborate this a bit more. So let's look at the database standards that Enterprise Manager supports out of the box. For database 12c and database 19c, there is support for CIS benchmarks out of the box. It supports all target database types, whether it's single instance, cluster, multi-tenant, which includes both container databases and pluggable databases. Enterprise Manager also supports STIC standards for 11.2g and 12c that are periodically published by Department of Defense, and EM has been supporting this for quite some time now. And EM also supports Oracle's own security best practices. Each of these standards provide you a set of compliance checks for various components of the database. Whether you want to focus on just the DB init parameters or monitor user privileges or do more broader checks. In addition to this out-of-the-box rules, you can customize existing rules, or you can create brand new rule that aligns with your own security policy. Now let's look at what is available for Linux hosts. Enterprise Manager supports SCAP framework for Linux hosts by leveraging the open SCAP engine in the host. So as a result of that, standards like PCI-DSS, HIPAA, and STIG are supported out of the box for Linux 7 and Linux 8. So for example, if let's say you're part of the healthcare segment and you're looking to secure your Linux host environment to be HIPAA compliant, you can leverage HIPAA standard that is available out of the box. On similar lines, if you are in the financial or retail segment and you're looking to ensure your Linux host is compliant with PCI-DSS, you could do so with the out-of-the-box PCI-DSS standard. Now, what is more interesting is if you look at each rule in PCI-DSS or HIPAA or other supported SCAP standards, you will find almost all of these rules are cross-referenced with rules in other standards or frameworks like ISO 27001 or CIS controls or COBIT framework or critical infrastructure cybersecurity. So a large set of these rules are exactly the same across many of these standards. So if you are looking for, say, COBIT framework support, you will likely see many rules already supported in EM out of the box in the rules repository. And if there are any unsupported rules or any missing rules for your COBIT framework, there is an option for you to create these rules within the EM compliance framework and align it with your security policies. Finally, for Linux hosts, if there is any other standard that you might be interested in, as long as it is in XCCDF format, you can import those XCCDF format Linux specific standards into EM compliance framework and use it just like any other compliance standard that you use today in EM. So that's a quick peek of what standards are supported for Linux hosts. Now, securing a database and monitoring its compliance is desired, but it is highly recommended to also secure underlying host so that both database and the host are secured, and hence the risk is reduced in terms of the risk exposure. So in this pictorial example that I have, you have 3 different hosts. Each host have different types of databases deployed. Depending on your security policies, you can either use a STIG standard for clusters or CIS for 19C pluggable, or you can have a completely customized standards for multi-tenant or single instance databases. With this, you have the needed security controls in place for each of the database assets in your data center. Now that the database is secured, you can look at securing the underlying host with standards like HIPAA, PCI-DSS, or STIG. Once that is done for both databases and hosts, you have essentially brought both of the target types into compliance management, and you'll be able to see an aggregated compliance of these heterogeneous targets, and by leveraging the compliance framework that we have. And whenever there is a violation for either of these targets, just the way the EM behaves today, you will get a notification and you'll be able to drill down into specific target to look at the specific violation. And so that's how you're going to protect your both databases and the underlying host from any security exposure. I'll quickly walk through some details for a few of these out-of-the-box standards. I'll start with the CIS benchmark for databases. With CIS benchmark, there are about 117 unique security controls spread across various areas like user access and restrictions, database parameter settings, database connectivity and login, and auditing system activities. Each configuration group defines detailed requirements to ensure secure configuration of Oracle database targets. For example, rules for ensuring certain users have broader privileges while some have restricted access to various database components like tables, packages, objects, etc., are part of the user access and restrictions group. The rules provided in CIS helps you to continuously monitor for any vulnerability. You can assess if users and administrators have least amount of privileges required, and to audit all administrative privileges. You may be familiar with CIS controls. This is CIS controls is a prioritized set of actions to protect your organization and data from known cyber attack vectors. So if you look at their latest version, which is version 8, you will see there are 18 CIS controls. The top 6 controls are considered basic, which implies these key controls should be implemented in every organization for essential cyber defense readiness. For example, if you look at control 5, it is about account management. The key recommendation in control 5 is to assign and manage authorization to credentials for user accounts, including administrator accounts as well as service accounts. So you will see subcontrols within control 5, which talks about changing default passwords, using unique passwords, maintaining inventory of administrative accounts. Similarly, if you look at another control, say control 6, it is primarily about access control management. And this control provides recommendations for you to create, assign, manage, or even revoke access credentials and privileges for users or administrators and even service accounts for all your database assets. And there are checks for each of these controls and subcontrols in the CIS benchmark that is provided out of the box for you. And that essentially ensures all these checks are monitored and violation reported if there is any deviation. Oracle has its own set of security standards for database assets, which will also enable you to secure, detect, and remediate your assets. These are, there are unique security rules spread across various areas. You can use these standards as is, or you can further customize to align with your own security policies. If I had to pick up an example, so let's say you are only interested in monitoring the privileges of DBA users. You could look at in a pluggable database environment. So you can look at basic security configuration for pluggable database standard, and that provides the rules for monitoring the privileges of all the DBA users. Now, let's say you want to monitor the privileges for DBA users, and also you want to audit various types of privileges for users. Then you can use what we call it as high security configuration for Oracle for pluggable databases, as this standard has the rules for auditing purposes also. So the way to map it in is if you want to do auditing plus all the other things, you use the standard that starts with the word high, and otherwise the basic security standards caters to many of these non-auditing compliance requirements. CIS and Oracle's best practices are just 2 examples that I'm calling out here, which are out of the box standards for database targets. As I said, similarly, there are stick standards available which follow similar model for database compliance. And STIG standards are especially important for all the federal agencies. So should be looking at that. Now let's look at two standards for Linux, HIPAA and PCI-DSS before we get into the demo. HIPAA standard provides 140 unique rules. With these unique security controls, you can do continuous vulnerability management. You can secure configuration of Linux instances. You can manage and monitor account and access controls. You can minimize administrative privileges. You can audit system activities. And of course, you can do the analysis of audit logs. Finally, the PCI-DSS standard for Linux. And PCI-DSS provides a baseline of technical and operational requirements designed to protect account data. If you're familiar with PCI-DSS, you will know that there are 12 PCI-DSS requirements that are grouped into 6 goals. Goal 1 is to build and maintain a secure network. Goal 2, protect cardholder data. 3, maintain a vulnerability management program. 4, implement strong access control measures. 5, regularly monitor for vulnerability. And 6, maintain an security policy in your organization. With controls provided in this out-of-the-box support, you will be able to secure your Linux host and be compliant with your PCI-DSS requirements. This is a quick overview for ways to standardize on well-known configurations, monitor for drifts, and analyze for potential exposure, apply security patches in a timely manner based on the out-of-the-box standard, and finally, secure your databases and underlying Linux host targets to be compliant with industry and regulatory standards with key intent to secure your sensitive data. Now let's look at a demo of compliance for both database and Linux hosts. For database, we will show management of revoking grant any role from unauthorized grantee. We'll show you the violation when not revoked, and we'll show the compliance when revoked. So you can see the difference before compliance and after compliance. And we'll wrap the demo with host-specific compliance, showing a PCI-DSS check to lock out an account after a number of incorrect login attempts. With this, you will get an idea of ways to bring in both database and underlying host under compliance management with Enterprise Manager. So here is the demo.
Hello, everyone. My name is Amol Chiplankar. I am the development manager for Enterprise Manager configuration and compliance team. So just to give you a quick overview of the compliance feature in Enterprise Manager, it gives you an ability to evaluate compliance of targets and systems as they relate to the industry best practices for security and configuration. So there is a concept of compliance framework, which is more like a collection of compliance standards. The compliance standards themselves are a collection of compliance rules, and compliance rule is the bottommost element in the collection of compliance artifacts in Enterprise Manager. One can select the compliance menu and go to the compliance library page. That's where these compliance artifacts are listed. They are arranged in 3 tabs. So as you can see, there are compliance frameworks, compliance standards, and compliance rules. Out of these 3, the compliance standards are the only compliance artifacts which can be checked against the compliance targets in a continuous basis. The process of attaching a compliance standard and initiating a check is achieved through an action called association. Enterprise Manager comes with several out-of-the-box industry standard-based compliance frameworks and compliance standards. And all these compliance standards have the predefined set of rules. In addition to the standards which are available out of the box, these rules, standards, and frameworks can be customized. Customized frameworks and standards are highly usable and more suitable to get an aggregated view of different types of targets, their score, compliance score, their compliance status against their corresponding standards. So this particular framework is a collection of some of the out-of-the-box standards. And let's take a look at the framework. The framework is called Security Framework for Oracle Products. And as you can see, it has sections for databases, for Linux hosts, and for other compliance standards. So if we take a look at some of the results which are available in this environment for this particular standard, you will see the usefulness of creating custom frameworks. So the results are available inside the compliance dashboard page. And the dashboard page offers a great summary of all the targets evaluated, all the violations and errors. Then the compliance violations by target type, a chart based on the target types. And then you have several lists. So you have a compliance score by frameworks, and one of them is the framework that we had just selected. So you see a high-level view, a pie chart for the compliance framework. Under the framework, you can see there are several targets, 3 databases and 1 host. And then you see the violations and compliance scores at the target level. So under the sections that we had created, you can see the appropriate standards nested. And more importantly, you can select the subsection, which is databases, and then you can see the chart, or you can see the pie chart only for that particular subsection. So let's take a look at one of the rules, which is highly security sensitive and important from data breach, avoiding data breach point of view. So this is the original CIS benchmark documentation as they have published it. And we are looking at a rule 5.2.15 from the CIS benchmark. It's called ensure grant any rule is revoked from unauthorized grantee. So we will go back and take a look at how the rule looks like inside the product. So for that, we go to the library page and we select the CIS standard. So once you find the standard you're interested in, you can select that standard and click on this action associate targets. So this brings up a page where you can select one or more targets to start the compliance checks. So in this case, I have 3 targets here. So we select these targets. It brings them in a list view. And then it waits for a confirmation. Click on OK. It will start deploying the necessary mechanism to begin continuous compliance. Yes. So after the necessary deployments that have happened for the compliance checks to begin, the standards reach a stage called transfer status is successful. Beyond this point, the results should be available in the compliance results view. So we'll go back and check the results for that particular compliance standard. So now pulling up the results again shows the view that we previously talked about. And we can directly go to the rule we are interested in. And as you can see, it already reports a violation for that particular rule. So it reports a violation only for the normal DB. And that's because a violation has been injected artificially to demonstrate this capability. Clicking on the violation count brings up the actual issue. So it says this is the rule. And then there is an unauthorized grantee by username C# normal user 1, which has this particular privilege in this particular database instance. And that's why this database instance or this database target is in violation of the rule. To remediate this violation, one can go to the command line, the SQL developer in this case, and then you can revoke that grant to bring this instance in compliance with the compliance standard. So it says the grant was successfully revoked. So let's take a look at the same rule again for the same target. So this time, as you can see, the violation has been remediated for normal DB. Similar to databases, there are compliance standards available for Oracle Linux hosts as well. One of them is the PCI-DSS standard, and there are some commonly used rules that are important in the context of data breach. As you can see, there are literally hundreds of rules there. So this rule reflects what has been defined in the original PCI-DSS SCAP standard available with every Oracle Linux distribution. Going to the security guide, you can take a look at the entire benchmark, the PCI-DSS benchmark, and then you can also search for that particular rule, set deny for failed password, which basically talks about configuring the system to lock out accounts after a number of incorrect login attempts are made. And there is a way to, of course, remediate as a system administrator by changing the appropriate etc system files. Once the configuration is updated, similar to CIS, we will see that the rule has been remediated. So this is all in short about the compliance capabilities in Enterprise Manager. Thank you.
Jim, okay. So there is a comprehensive set of documents and collaterals available. There is a dedicated chapter on configuration and compliance management and the 13.5 docs.oracle.com for Enterprise Manager. And there is also compliance standards reference guide that you could leverage. In addition, there will be blogs that will be put out based on this webcast. And you could go to our product page, oracle.com/enterprise-manager, and go to database ops automation that will give you more details on on compliance and configuration and compliance management of both of databases, underlying Linux host, and also the infrastructure.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Harish. To our audience, we've got some really good questions coming in. We're going to dedicate this time here for your questions. So use that Q&A panel down on the bottom. Amal, great demo. Thank you very much for that. Nice view out your window too. Very good. Harish, great presentation. One of the questions we're hearing is about licensing. Harish, do you want to talk about some of the requirements to use these features that you've been talking about?
Sure. So everything that we talked today is primarily around configuration and compliance management, which is the third pillar in the database lifecycle management pack. So you will need to license that for managing your databases, your underlying hosts, and also even the engineered systems underneath that.
Okay, that's great. There was another question about managing the roles in Enterprise Manager. Can you set role access for those managing the compliance frameworks and only give access to those on the compliance team, so to speak?
Yes, I mean, yeah, go ahead.
So there is a separate chapter on how to control users and their permissions, and then there are specific permissions which can be given to users so that they can only do CRUD operations on compliance standards and so on, and then the other types of users who can only operate on it, not create them. So I sent the documentation link as well in the question and answer.
Great, thanks, Amal. Thanks, Harish, on that one. Let's see, let me look in Q&A. What else do we have coming? So, yeah, so I think, these capabilities aren't necessarily just for the CSO office. We all need to be good security citizens, and these tools really look like a great avenue to automate a lot of these activities and leverage the best of the best, utilize Oracle's expertise to make all this stuff happen, and enable you as DBAs to scale your activities, have some reliance that the checks and so on that you're running are actually validating against your industry standards or even your company standards. So great tools, great topic for everybody. Let's see, we do have our experts on the line. Is there any other points that you want to bring out based on the questions we've been getting? Harish, Steve, Amal, any comments from you?
So these compliance frameworks that we have been talking about, the standards that we have been talking about, is already available in both in 13.4 and 13.5. One other thing that I would like to highlight here is, let's say you're looking for CIS for database 19C. We recently published support for self-update. So what it essentially means is, whenever we support, we certify a standard, whether it's CIS or STIG or any other standard for any other target, and that will get posted. And as long as you are on EM 13.4 or 13.5, you don't need to upgrade your EM to a newer EM version. All you need to do is download that standard into your library and you're up and running with that. So that's a huge advantage for you, mainly because you don't need to go through that EM upgrade process just to get support for that one new standard that you're looking for.
Good point. Good feature. All right. Thanks, Harish. I got another question. We've got a couple of technical ones. I'm going to turn over to you guys on the webcast itself. We are recording it. We will provide the slides, and it's actually going to be in that blog shown on the slide there. I'll put the URL for that blog in the chat. So take a look for that in a second here.
So as each of you are probably taking a journey and trying to get to multi-tenant based deployment model in your environment. And as you do this, think data breaches, think security, and I'm sure that is one of the key requirements that you'll be factoring in. And we recommend you look at EM's compliance solutions. If you already own DBLM pack, you already have it. You just need to take advantage of what is already available and what you already have, and start securing your pluggable databases.
That's great. Thanks, Harish. Another question around how do you stay current with the standards? How do you bring the updated standards into EM as they get updated?
Yeah. So as I said, there is this self-update right now available. So as and when we provide support for newer version of the standard. So let's say CIS has published benchmark, CIS benchmark version 1.0.0 for DB19C, and that we already support today. And at some point in the future, they will refresh that version to .next. Once we validate and get the certification from CIS, we will post that supported standard on the portal, and you should be able to leverage the self-update feature to get access to the latest refreshed benchmark.
Great. And if I remember right, you said to use this, you need 13.4 or 13.5?
Correct. The self-update feature works with any 13.4 or any version of 13.5 only.
Great. All right. We're still getting a bunch of questions. We'll get to as many of these as we can. Good topics. Let's see. The other thing I will mention is this webcast is part of the Enterprise Manager Deep Dive series. You'll get a link for this webcast series as well. I'll put that in the chat as well. Let's see. Harish, I think you are next up on the webcast series. You have another one coming up, is that right?
Right. On September 29th, there will be another webcast session. This is on Migration Workbench. This is a tool that will enable you to migrate your source databases on your existing source platform to your new desired platform and our destination. If the destination is Exadata, for example, so you can move from legacy hardware to new Exadata engineered systems, or you could migrate to autonomous database, or you could migrate to DBCS, bare metal VMs. You will have those capabilities for the databases, for database versions 12c and I do believe we support 11.2 also, 11.204 and 12C. And this September 29th session is about migration workbench topic. And if you're looking to migrate your databases from, as I said, you're trying to re-platform or you're trying to move to a newer entity, yeah, that session will be for you.
Great. So yeah, again, very similar to today's session, you gain a lot of automation that gives you assurance, reduce risks in your migration. It also helps you scale because you've got this automation capabilities built in. So that's somebody else was asking in the Q&A about some of the advantages of moving from, say, 13.3 Enterprise Manager 13.3 to 13.5, and the migration workbench is a good example of some of the new features to look forward to.
No, in addition to that, I mean, if you're at all you're looking at compliance as for your data center, and if you're at all you're looking to secure your Linux host, 13.4, I believe some 13.4 RU7 onwards, you have SCAP support, or RU9 release update 9 onwards, or you have SCAP support. So there is which does not exist with 13.3. So plus there are a lot of performance tunings, enhancements done in various areas. So there are, I'm sure if you look at the release notes and watch new document and at docs.oracle.com for Enterprise Manager, you will be able to see those things. So there is good amount of additions in terms of new features that is available on 13.5 or later part of 34, something that you can consider.
Great.
And if you're an Exadata customer and you're looking to secure and do compliance management of Exadata system components, we recommend you consider 13.5 because there will be out of the box compliance standards for Exadata system management from health monitoring standpoint.
All right, I'm going to post the deep dive Enterprise Manager webcast series link there to the chat. We're running out near the end of our time. We will continue answering questions as long as we can. Great topics. Thank you very much to our presenters, Amal and Harish. And thank you to everyone in our audience. We'll keep going as long as we can. We got another 2 minutes or so. And we'll wrap up. I did post in the Q&A. We will have a recording of today's session as well as a copy of the slides. And we'll also highlight some of the resources that we talked about here today in the blog post that I just posted in the Q&A. All right. Anybody else have any other points they want to bring up before we close out today? Fantastic. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a great day. Thank you to our audience as well as our presenters.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.